Homeopathy. You never heard of it, right? But if you look on the aisle right next to the real drugs, you'll see some stuff it's kind of hard to read. You have to look at the fine print. It'll say homeopathic remedies. So what is that stuff? And does it do what it says it does? Let's discuss. So somewhere around 1790, a guy named Samuel Hahnemann, he was a German person with a fresh medical degree, started experimenting with quinine. The quinine made him feel like he had a fever, not a big one, just a little one, but to him it felt like he was coming down with something. That's interesting, he thought, since jabbing somebody with a little bit of cowpox wards off smallpox. This was a recent discovery in his time. Maybe a small amount of quinine would help things with the cold or the flu. So before long, we were off to the races with homeopathy. Now, that's not totally crazy, is it? I mean, after all, isn't that how many vaccines work, the older ones at least? Don't they give people a little bit of the thing that makes them sick to jack up their immune system? And Hahnemann was likely influenced by ideas from the Middle Ages where kidney-shaped beans make your kidneys better, for example, because things that remind you of your problem have healing powers. I'm not making fun, by the way. Back in the 18th century, medical knowledge was a free-for-all. He didn't have much to go on, really. I certainly don't blame him, not for knowing how quinine would act biologically. That wouldn't have been possible, not in his time. In fact, he went a little bit down science road by observing the effects of something, even if it was just on himself. If he had given his potion to enough people and carefully noted how they reacted when they were exposed to the flu compared to how a similar group reacted to the flu without the benefit of his remedy, we would be talking science. If he had invited other doctors to scrutinize his work looking for loopholes, oh man, his statue would be in medical colleges the world over. He didn't do that, did he? All he did was observe his reactions to the potion itself when he wasn't actually sick. When he got around to actually concocting his brew, Hahnemann had to figure out the right dose. He knew it wouldn't do to give someone too much of a thing that made them feel bad. What's the point in that? So Hahnemann diluted his potion with water. And that's the rub, or the additional rub anyway, because that's the key to how Hahnemann's homeopathy whiffs the ball so bad. You see, Hahnemann somehow concluded the weaker the substance, the stronger its effect. So that idea led him to repeatedly dilute his cures over and over again until, in most cases, there was nothing left, not a single atom. According to him, if you shook the thing a certain way while you were diluting it, it increased its ability to fix you independent of what's left in the diluted mixture. If you want a good idea of how diluted this stuff was, his personal goal for diluting things was a dilution of 10 to the power of 60. That's like dividing by a trillion times. A little more, actually. Try that with your vodka. Your liver will thank you. I can't see how Hahnemann's drugs could have done much for his patients, but they certainly did a lot of good for his finances. His ideas made him a rich man. Now, some people say that Hahnemann did some good by saving people from the even more dangerous practices of conventional doctors of his time. I suppose that's possible, but the same can't be said of today's homeopathic drugs. Bloodletting and trephining are long gone, and modern medicine is way better than homeopathy. Well, those 19th century ideas of Hahnemann are still in play in the 21st century. They're the core of modern homeopathy. So maybe you're wondering why anybody believes in this stuff. Why would they think it does something if there's nothing in it to do anything? Homeopathy's believers really get into it. I've heard everything from quantum entanglement to superposition to explain why it could work. But the thing I mostly hear is water memory. I'll address that if you don't mind. So how do you dilute away all the arsenic or whatever until it's all gone and still have the magic effect? Their answer to that question is a simple one. Water, they say, holds onto a memory of the active ingredient even after it's been diluted away to nothing. That's their assertion. Water memory. How exactly water knows to hold on to a memory of the thing they put into the water and not all the other stuff it's been in contact with over the last 3 years, that isn't clear. But being an easy grader, I will ignore that. However, memory is a term that describes what happens in brains. Frogs, gerbils, pigeons, humans, we all have memories. We can recall things from the past because events are encoded in our brains. To keep it simple, let's just say that the encoding of memories involves changes to neurons in our brains. In other words, memories are physical. They happen because something physical changes. Not only that, but once those things have changed, they stay changed long enough for that memory to be retrieved at some later date. Does that sound like water? What exactly would change in water so that it would stick around long enough to remind the water that there'd been some arsenic or deadly nightshade back in the day? That's ridiculous, right? But like I said, I'm an easy grader. If homeopathic remedies survive the same kinds of tests that FDA-approved drugs survive, I would be happy to start looking for what I missed about water memory and all the other gobbledygook that supposedly explains how it works. But backwards as I am willing to lean over, I just cannot lean over backwards so far as to accept a mere claim based on an absurd theory. Well, you can see why I think these supposed drugs are a waste of money, but it's actually worse than that. Unfortunately, some of these so-called remedies are not all water or alcohol. Some of them have things in them like deadly nightshade or turpentine that survive the dilution process enough to do a job on anybody who is silly enough to gulp this stuff down. How do I know this? Have people actually been hurt by this stuff? Have people been hurt by this stuff? Oh, it happens. For example, the FDA said 8 babies died after taking homeopathic teething products which contained deadly nightshade, belladonna. To be fair, that could have been a screw-up in manufacturing since, you wouldn't really expect highly dilute substances to be fatal, although infants would, of course, be a lot more sensitive. But if homeopathic drugs were treated like real drugs, the way that they're manufactured would be governed by GMP, good manufacturing practices, and heavily scrutinized too. So these things would not happen. Well, this is a bad thing. You don't want people wasting money on things that don't work. Not when they could maybe buy something that'll help, right? So the obvious question, what's up with the FDA? What is the Food and Drug Administration doing to protect the public? I thought you would never ask. Here's the thing. For many years, the FDA was guided by a compliance policy that more or less shielded homeopathic products from going through this pre-market approval process that other drugs have to go through. But that changed in 2022 when all homeopathic drugs were reclassified as new drugs that had to jump through the same hoops as other drugs. So that was a step in the right direction, right? And I should note, parenthetically, that as things stand today, not a single homeopathic drug has been approved, at least not yet. I don't think they will be. But that left the FDA with a dilemma. Well, what should they do about the big backlog of homeopathic drugs that are already out there? So after some head scratching, they decided on a so-called risk-based enforcement approach where they would go after the worst stuff first. That was a good step, but it left the lower priority homeopathic drugs waiting in the wings until the agency, with its limited resources, could get to them. And now everything's up in the air again with Robert Kennedy Jr. taking over as head of the FDA. Kennedy is new. If you're not familiar with him, he's not the one with the PT boat. This Kennedy is a different kind of hero. He's a hero to the alternative medicine crowd. Fans of homeopathy are thrilled about his appointment. Well, I guess we'll see how it all dilutes out, but I am not optimistic. For now, it's a buyer beware world. My advice, if it sounds too good to be true, read the fine print. Water's good for your plants, but it won't do a damn thing for your leg cramps. If you are feeling blah, and if you need something to make you feel better, you are kind of on your own to make sure you don't get ripped off. Just keep on looking out for number one. Well, that's the story on homeopathy. Now you know. So, that's about it for this edition of Dave and Your Health. It's been great seeing you, and I'll catch you next time.